Okay, Jean Charest is standing by. He is a former Premier of Quebec, of course, a former Deputy Prime Minister, and a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Canada-U.S. Relations. Jean Charest, I don't know if you're as confused as the rest of us, but I wonder what your sense is. Is this a day for relief on avoiding these global reciprocal tariffs, or still in the middle of deep trade anxiety because of what's happening with auto, steel, and aluminum? How would you describe today?
Well, David, what I see is that we're all suffering from the Stockholm Syndrome. You'll remember the concept. We've been taken hostage by Donald Trump for the last few months, who on a day-to-day basis throws stuff at us and sees whether it sticks to the wall or not, and we react. And now we hear 10%, we conclude it's good news. Actually, when a government announces these things, David, they have a responsibility to be clear. They obviously aren't, and I think they're going to pay a price for that confusion when the market's open tomorrow, because it's going to be difficult for people to work their way through this. What it comes out of this, though, it should be very clear for Canada. The auto sector is hit very hard. And that is going to have a deep impact. It means that we're going to have to look at how we respond to that. As we respond, by the way, we need to be strategic and we need to be intelligent about it. The situation's evolved a lot since we put together an initial package of $125 billion, you remember, on which we consulted, and now we return. So the Prime Minister and his government are going to have a close look at where we need to respond and where we go, and be as pointy as we can. One thing I like about this announcement today is that he's packaging this in legislation that will go to Congress, as opposed to executive orders for which we just have to deal with. That gives us a lot of touch points to be able to respond to what is in this package with congressmen and senators, and that is for Canada a much different playbook than the one we've had to deal with from the beginning of this administration.
No, that is a very good point, because certainly there are a lot of like-minded people in the House of Representatives and in the Senate to Canada and how these trade disputes should be settled, and it does, it makes the midterm elections coming up a whole lot more important in terms of stabilizing these things. But I know there was a meeting of the Prime Minister's Council on Canada-U.S. Relations in the run-up to this before.
Yes.
I'm assuming you didn't know at that time. I don't know if you were given the heads up or if you found out from the chart like the rest of the world. But what's your advice to Mark Carney, knowing what we know now, in terms of how Canada should respond to this? Is this the time to de-escalate on this side of the border, or is it to hold firm, keeping things in place until everything is gone?
Well, as we look at the longer midterm picture, we need to keep everything on the table in terms of options. A. B, be very strategic in what we do, be targeted, as I mentioned, especially if we have legislation in Congress. Then we have a lot of touch points to work with. And our embassy is going to be very busy with all of that. I think we need to take time and take whatever time is necessary to analyze all of this carefully. And once the smoke has cleared and we understand what we're exactly dealing with. And finally, I'd add this, David. The Prime Minister and the President in their conversation seem to agree on a longer-term agreement. That's good news for us. It may not be, or with today's announcement about the present agreement, CUSMA, maybe the Americans want to continue with CUSMA. If that's the case, there has to be a longer-term negotiation that will allow us to have at least some predictability in regards to our trade relationship with the United States.
There's about $60 billion in round numbers in counter tariffs in place, if my math is correct, Mr. Charest. The $30 billion for the initial fentanyl tariffs, let's call them, and then another $30 billion for the steel and aluminum. I don't know if we've done anything just yet on auto. I think the plan was to wait and see. Do you think those will stay in place? I mean, ultimately it's up to Mr. Carney and his cabinet, but it seems like those the triggering decisions for those have not gone away. So do you think it stays status quo there?
Well, we can look at what it is that we put out there and see whether in this new configuration, it's a whole new configuration, what works and what is the most effective, always keeping in mind. I mean, we all agree that whatever we do, we want to, as much as we can, protect Canadian consumers and Canadian jobs. And so, of course, we should look at it with that view. But also, David, we need to be very clear. This is a world of very bad choices. We only have bad choices when we reply. The logic of tariffs and counter tariffs is bad for everyone. So that's the world in which we are making choices, and we all wish it were different, but we have to defend our fundamental sovereign interest as we go ahead with this.
No, look, the tariff versus tariff, it's a circular firing squad for the citizens and the companies of the various countries. So just as a final point, Mr. Charest, Mark Carney said last week that that underlying relationship of economic integration, defense and security cooperation, it's over. I mean, how do you see it based on this reprieve today? Are we still in that world that it's like, even if it gets better from this point on, you just got to look elsewhere for the long term?
A moment ago on your show, someone mentioned that Trump would leave office at one point. The truth of the matter is Trumpism is with us for the foreseeable future, whether it's Donald Trump or anyone else. Our world and our relationship with the United States has changed forever. Donald Trump, we may thank him in 30 years from now because he will have forced Canada to look at how we operate our economy, how we operate our federal system, and the place that we occupy in the world. But we will never return to the relationship we had before.
Jean Charest, we appreciate you joining us on a busy and kinetic day. Let's call it that. We appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to get back to the Power panel. We heard from Amanda. We've got Jordan Likeness, Tim Powers, and Sherelle Evelyn here. Jordan, let's start with you. I mean, Jean Charest says no matter what, Trumpism is here to stay, and we've just got to deal with that going ahead. I mean, where do you think this leaves things today?
Yeah, I fear he's right about that. There's no indication that these trends of economic nationalism are going to leave the United States anytime soon. And I think today there's a danger that people will want to feel a bit relieved or to see this as good news. But having 25% tariffs on our auto sector, on our steel, on our aluminum, we're still talking about hundreds of thousands of workers who are going to be impacted. Layoffs and shutdowns are going to be coming. This is really serious, and there's a real risk to normalizing those tariffs as well. So I think that there's a moment here where we have an opportunity to calibrate our response.
Right.
And, the idea of minimally targeted reciprocal tariffs, I think are going to be very important, ones that harm Canadians the least. But I have to say, I do think politically this is probably a pretty good day for the Liberal campaign. Politically, this is a pretty good day for Prime Minister Mark Carney. There were a lot of scenarios in which this could have gone much worse for him if Trump had come in with tariffs that would have stacked on top of what's already there. But I think the question as we move forward is going to be, what's in place to support the workers who are going to be impacted by this and the industries that are going to be living out these impacts, even as we're in some sort of a negotiating position potentially with the Americans on this? Yeah,
look, right now there's liquidity programs and loan programs and changes to EI to help deal with the initial shock of this, but long term is going to need a lot more.
We also have to remember, still, like, our EI system is not very good. Only 2 in 5 workers qualify. So there are going to be people who are going to fall through the gaps, and we need to be ready to catch them.
Yeah, maybe not in steel and aluminum directly, but in the ripple effect throughout it. That's going to be a challenge. But Tim, Jordan is right. Like, despite the relief that it didn't get worse, when you've got 2 broken arms and a broken leg, it's a relief not to break your ribs, but you've still got a bunch of busted limbs, and these are key industries still being hit by these tariffs.
I don't know about you. I played rugby like that, but you were a little softer. So let's remember that. Look, there's a small sense of gratification, I suppose, that we can take that it weren't hit today, but tomorrow's going to be a bad day for a lot of Canadians, and we are going to be in this abusive partnership as long as Donald Trump is there, unless something changes dramatically, and that is going to be really toiling, and it's not going to go away as much as we would like it to, unless Trump finds some other distraction beyond his crusade on tariffs.
Sherelle, how do you view these developments, lack of developments? Is a lack of development a development? I don't know anymore after 3 months of Trump.
I don't think anybody knows.
Yeah.
I think the word that was used earlier was exhausting, and I think that's definitely what it is when you're dealing with the president. The thing that did stick out to me, I was thinking about, is what does this do for, because we're talking about Canada and how this affects the Canadian field, but what about internationally? Are these the types of things that Donald Trump is doing that is actually going to spur that reaction that people have been looking for and wondering, like, why can't there be some sort of collective pushback or even just any pushback? Because you talk to European leaders, representatives, and they will repeatedly say, when you say, okay, well, Canadians are asking, where are our friends? Why aren't you sticking up for Canada? And everybody says, we don't want to poke the bear. They don't want to agitate.
Well, the bear poked them today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now that it's come exactly to their doorstep, yes, they were usually more concerned about Greenland and Ukraine and things like that. But now these are hits to their own economies. Are they now going to be saying, hey, maybe Canada was onto something and this is something that we should be getting in on?
Yeah, I mean, just to look at the European Union, which is one of the markets Canada would like to pivot to, they're being hit with a 20%, what they call, is kind of Orwellian speak, USA discounted reciprocal tariffs, because they claim the EU essentially hits them with a 39% tariff. So, Japan, a G7 partner, is hit with a 24% USA discounted reciprocal tariff. And so, Amanda, while the list of this is just, it goes on and on and on to the point that Saint Pierre and Miquelon, the French islands off the coast of Newfoundland, are hit with a tariff, as is Gibraltar.
Yeah.
There may not be a direct smack on Canada, but there is a sideswipe of global trade that is going to just dampen things everywhere right now. That just is a broad macro, like a global level economic concern if these go ahead.
For sure. It's the broad global economic ripple effect is what will be like the cascade that comes out of this announcement. And you did still get the sense with him at the mic that everything it's at the whim of Donald Trump, of all people, right? So that chaos, that underlying chaos and uncertainty and unpredictability of what he could do next is still there. How all of these other nations respond, the ripple effect of that, how the markets respond, consumer confidence responds. I mean, it feels like never ending. And certainly when Canada is starting to position itself vis-a-vis some of these other nations to diversify our trading relationships, how will they pivot and how will their pivots affect what we intend to do? So again, it feels like just the beginning, certainly not the end of this ongoing saga with Trump.
Jordan, I wonder, what do you think? We're standing by, just to let people know at home, we're not showing you that door because it's pretty. That's an elevator. We're waiting for the Prime Minister. There's going to be a cabinet meeting starting kind of any minute now. Jordan, I don't know if we'll get the full response from Mark Carney today. I think he wants to meet with his cabinet, see the things, and roll it out tomorrow. What does Carney say to Canadians in this moment on a day like this, do you think?
Well, I think he needs to reassure Canadians that there's a plan to chart a path out of this chaos. And it's this yo-yoing, the threats back and forth, that's really causing so much of the worry for Canadians and for business. And so I think one of the things that we can look for from him is certainly a path forward, perhaps more towards negotiations. And it was interesting to see today, that was a pivot on the part of Trump. The idea that he would be making reference to the trade agreement, that is still something that has some weight with him when he's the one who has violated his own trade agreement, is probably a bit of a hopeful sign for the Canadian government that there might be a path there. But I agree. I think that Canada's been very exposed. We've been out there fighting back alone. And so to have some allies around the world joining us in that would be helpful.
Okay, look, while Canada may have been spared from these global reciprocal discounted tariffs, Trump did reference Canada throughout his announcement. Just have a listen to this.
We're going to start being smart, and we're going to start being very wealthy again. We're going to be wealthy as a country because they've taken so much of our wealth away from us. We're not going to let that happen. We truly can be very wealthy. We can be so much wealthier than any country. It's not even believable, but we're getting smart. Nearly a century later, in the face of unrelenting economic warfare, the United States can no longer continue with a policy of unilateral economic surrender. We cannot pay the deficits of Canada, Mexico, and so many other countries. We used to do it. We can't do it anymore.
Okay, that's U.S. President Donald Trump speaking in the Rose Garden a little over an hour ago, I believe it was. Tim, Jordan's point is that Mark Carney needs to come out and kind of reassure Canadians. How do you reassure them there's a plan to get out of the chaos of the Trump machine when he's got 45 months left in office?
You can't, but what you have to guard against, and this is a problem for Liberals in the past, is any form of triumphalism. You don't want to say today is a big victory and we've held off.
It's not,
and Mark Carney is not likely to say that, but I'm already seeing some social media that suggests not Mark Carney, but others that are trumpeting this, pardon the pun. I dial that down very quickly. I think Mark Carney has to keep saying, we've got your back. We've got your back. Because that is the only thing he controls right now. Canada can assist, how they assist, how quickly they assist, how they respond. He can control that. He has no control over Donald Trump. And I think Canadians want to hear that they will be protected at some level should this continue in the vein it's continuing.
The one thing, Sherelle, that I look at from today that is an extra layer of reassurance is that, in February it was until March 2nd. In March it was until April 2nd. He hasn't said anything yet about May. So we got that going for us.
Early.
Maybe I'm grasping at paper straws here. But, it is kind of status quo. We'll figure out where things go with steel, aluminum, and auto. And that's, I think, what we need to hear from the Prime Minister.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there are still things that have to be addressed. And as the others have said, people are going to be thinking about, okay, but what have you done for me lately? And if we have a hit that is coming, that we know is coming, might not be an additional hit, but the people want to know, okay, shore us up. Where do we go from here? What certainty can you offer us in these troubling times? Because there is so little certainty with everything. You cannot control, as everybody knows, what Donald Trump is going to do or say on any given day. So the only things the government can do right now is to tell people, we know for what we know is coming, this is what we're doing, and this is how we have your back.
Okay, if you're just joining us, just to catch you up, you're watching Power Politics. We are standing by to hear from Prime Minister Mark Carney, who will be convening a meeting of his Canada-U.S. Cabinet Committee within the next few minutes. We expect him to arrive and respond to what Donald Trump said in the Rose Garden a little over an hour ago, outlining a global tariff plan from the President of the United States that to this point excludes Canada and Mexico from any additional tariffs. The ones going into effect on the steel and aluminum, already in place on steel and aluminum, and the ones announced, I'm going to say last week, because time is moving fast in this election and this trade war, on the auto sector, will go into effect at midnight tonight. But no additional tariffs on top of the ones that were already in place were imposed here on Canada or on Mexico, on what Donald Trump calls Liberation Day, what the rest of us call April 2nd, and we are standing by to hear from Prime Minister Mark Carney on that as he once again steps off the campaign trail as Liberal leader in that role to step into his parliamentary job as the Prime Minister of Canada in the middle of a trade war with its biggest trading partner. So with all of that said, Amanda, I'm going to start with you, but knowing Mark Carney could dodge around that corner any minute, and we'll have to go to Mark Carney. What's your sense of what he needs to say here? I mean, bearing in mind this is a trade war, which is an enormously important thing, happening in an election, which is also an enormously important thing. What do you expect to hear from Mark Carney?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think, first of all, a couple of days ago, we were all talking about the devastation of 25% tariffs on our auto sector, right? Those tariffs are happening, and they're happening at midnight tonight. And so I think that there is a temptation, even I had the temptation to breathe a sigh of relief that we weren't included in the reciprocal tariffs. But the worst case scenario, or one of the worst case scenarios around the auto sector, is happening, and it's happening today. So I think the Prime Minister needs to address that, needs to address this critical sector, needs to address particularly Ontarians, and needs to talk about how Canada will respond. I don't expect that he will have that plan in place because, as you said, he's still meeting with his cabinet. He's still meeting with the Canada-U.S. committee. But Canadians will want to know how we're responding to that. I think the second thing is I will build on what Tim said. I think that there is an early temptation to call this a win for the Liberals. And I think that that is territory that they should avoid. Yeah. I think certainly the tone has changed, and we can appreciate that for as long as it exists. That phone call happened between Prime Minister Carney and the President, and suddenly he had dropped some of the negative and kind of punitive words that he was using when he referred to Canada. And I think we can all be hopeful that potentially that signals the ability for this relationship to, dare I say, even flourish in the future, potentially, but it can easily swing the other way. And it could swing the other way in the course of this election. So I think it would be foolish for the Liberals to go so far down that road that they claim a victory before they should. I think he needs to take a really tempered approach, ease some of the anxieties that Canadians are feeling around some of these new tariffs, while at the same time really talking about how Canadians and Canada is poised to position itself on the backside of these tariffs.
David Patterson is Ontario's representative in Washington. We had a very good conversation a few weeks back, walking us through what it is the Americans wanted, and it's spelled out on that meeting you were in, David Patterson. How do you fit what we heard today into your understanding of the president's goals now?
Well, I think we've been expecting this day, and it's a monumental day globally, as the Prime Minister said, and also caught Lana's remarks. And there's obviously huge concern and work to be done with our steel and aluminum and other industries. But there's also some good news in terms of the work that we've been doing, and certainly the work that Premier Ford's done with Secretary Lutnick and others. And it really has rested in the Premier's argument that USMCA compliant companies should not be getting tariff application in the same way that others that are not USMCA compliant. Right. We saw that in three ways today, and I think it's important to call those out because I think they are victories for Premier Ford. One is, and we've seen this previously, that there's been a significant sort of reduction for Ontario's auto sector in that the application of tariffs is only on the portion that is not U.S. content. And because our automakers do have 50% content in Ontario, that gives a very significant relative competitive
Does that mean a
advantage.
12% tariff, as you understand it, Dave Patterson? Is that how you see it?
Yes.
Is that what we're talking about there?
12.5.
Yeah, okay.
12.5. And so effectively, if you've got the tariff is only applied on the non-U.S. Content of the vehicle, and those vehicles, all five makers, will have 50% content. So effectively, it gives us in the range of a net 12.5% tariff. But then in addition to that, very important, we have the continuation of the USMCA compliance, again, exemption for the fentanyl tariffs. We were very worried that if we had a stacking of that 25% tariff as well as the auto tariffs, that could be curtains for our auto sector, but we didn't have that today. Same argument from Premier Ford. It should not be, USMCA compliance matters. And then USMCA compliance, thirdly, got us a 0% tariff on the reciprocal tariffs when we see others getting 50%, 46% around the world. So again, on a relative basis, this is significant progress, but lots of work to be done. There's questions to be figured out with regard to auto parts, which are duty-free still at the moment. But we have to figure those out. And obviously lumber and steel and the others, but it started with that discussion here in Washington between the Premier and Secretary Lutnick.
But, David Patterson, and I've got to get to Flavio Volpe before I run out of show. It tells you how much things have changed. We're looking at a 12.5% tariff on cars as relief and a victory with the level of disruption that this has caused. When you're in a free trade agreement, you've had the auto pact for decades. The hit to the global trading system right now is also going to be felt in Canada. So there's a lot of difficult times ahead just because of those other actions today.
Yeah, no question. And we've been hearing that from President Trump for 2 years. So we should be prepared. And it doesn't mean we like it, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue to try and renew the USMCA eventually. But in the short term, we had a crisis that would have cost us our auto sector, and it won't now. You'll hear concerns from the parts industry in Canada. We understand that. We want to make things better for them as well. But for those that are really driving the jobs, it's the major automakers that do that, and then parts follow. So this is, for the Ontario economy, a very good step forward. Okay, well, David Patterson, we appreciate that. Still a lot of uncertainty there, a lot of things to be figured out. How do you administer these tariffs that require this dissection of cars? But at least it wasn't another trade bomb today directly related at Canada. So David Patterson, the Ontario representative in Washington. Thank you, sir. We'll check in with you again, I think, throughout this week. We appreciate your time. Thanks, David.